enthusiastic about this meeting, so we're
Well,
glad you got
let's
here.
get into it. Okay. I
Yeah,
think
let's get into it.
we have 7 minutes left to discuss the whole thing. So let's pack everything in 2 minutes.
Michael, I thought we had two hours tonight. So
I know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just
okay,
irritable.
good. All right, let's begin. Welcome everyone to our quarterly Q&A session with Michael Hudson, who's been analysing the economic matrix for 55 years. So over a dozen books, yeah, a lot of support out there for his work. We love seeing all the comments in all the different YouTubes he's involved in, and great to have our Patreon supporters here today to delve into the topics of the day from their perspective. So we really respect everyone's support for the support and independent funding of Michael's work is just so important. As we know, it's getting harder and harder to get the word out. So great we can come together here and ask Michael the key questions of the time. So we do have a bit of a different format today, so that Michael we don't have a separate Q&A question stream, so just put your questions in the chat, and after a little while we'll get some people to come up on screen. So Michael, how are you reading the LA riots and what's happening there? What sort of distraction agenda is going on in America at present?
How am I reading the what?
The LA riots and why LA riots.
Line.
The riots in Los Angeles.
Well, they're not riots at all. People have come. There's just as in Ukraine, you have people rising up against the army recruiters that are going in and grabbing Ukrainians to send them to the front. Here you have the immigration authorities coming and just they're going into Hispanic restaurants. They're going into construction sites. They're going into anywhere they think there may be Hispanics and just arresting whatever Hispanics they can think of without looking at whether they're citizens or not. Just being a Hispanic is grounds for being arrested and quickly deported before they can have a chance to say, let me go home and get my passport that I usually don't carry out if I'm going to have dinner. So Trump says, if you don't agree with American policy, you're a rioter, you're a Marxist. It would be wonderful if there were all these Marxists in California. I think California and Marxism are about as antithetical as you can probably get on the ideological spectrum. So a riot is simply not agreeing with what Trump said. And there are a number of quotes he's been giving. I want everybody to agree with me. Or at his birthday parade this Saturday, he said, if there's anybody with a sign or anything, they'll be arrested. We don't have any First Amendment anymore guaranteeing the right of free speech. So if you want a right of free speech and it doesn't agree with Trump, you can be arrested. You may not remember what Mark Twain said. If elections really mattered, they wouldn't let you do it. So basically, that's the situation. Trump can do whatever he wants, and the Supreme Court can say this is illegal under the Constitution. And Trump will say, what are you going to do about it? The Supreme Court doesn't have an army. The Congress doesn't have an army. He's in control of the National Guard. And so he can send in the National Guard. I remember in the 1930s, my father convinced Floyd B. Olson, the governor of Minnesota, to call in the National Guard to protect the strikers in the great truckers strike that was a general strike in Minneapolis. And the National Guard was called in by the governor not the president or the governor, to protect the strikers and the demonstrators against the thugs that I'm told Walgreens and other trucking companies had all called in to try to bang up the strikers. So it's possible that the National Guards can do some good, but that was during the Roosevelt era. And of course, by the time of the Vietnam War, the National Guard was called in to shoot students that demonstrated against the Vietnam War. And you had the shooting at Kent University. The National Guard is basically turned into the personal army of the president, and there's nothing that the government can do about it. And there's nothing Congress is going to change about that. None of this is about economics. This is just in case there are non-Americans listening and you don't know the weird twists and turns of the American constitutional government and legal system. It's all been very educational in the last few days.
Okay, and there's interest from Sunil Basu on when your new book will be published on the debt crusades.
Well, the book's all finished. It's being proofread now, and the index is being made. And the index, which is being made in Australia, it will probably take about 2 months. Then it'll take another month for the typesetting that'll be done in Hong Kong. I'm looking for a better cover designer. What am I going to have for a cover? If I do have an illustration, I'd like it to be on the left-hand side. You'll have a church, and somehow this church will be metamorphosizing into a bank, because in America, many of the banks look just like the old Greek temples, the same temples of finance, you could say. I'm thinking that there could be something like that, but there has to be room for the title too. Otherwise, it's just the title. So if any of you know of very good book designers, that would be appreciated. There's also something else we're looking for. As you know, I do a weekly broadcast on Nima's show, Dialogue Works, with Rick Wolf. And a number of publishers, lefty publishers, have wanted to take our lectures and put them into a book, at least the best lectures, and publish them. But we need an editor, somebody who can go through in the early, maybe 10 or 20 shows, I would give sort of my usual zippy remarks, and then Richard would usually have a 15-minute set piece that he would do, and many of the set pieces would go way beyond the topic that Nima was asking it about. So there has to be some way of paring down what both of us say to get the essence of what we're talking about as we're analyzing the whole geopolitical structure of the world and how it's all changing. So if anybody thinks they'd like to be a copy editor and have pretty free range and cutting, pasting, deciding what's important, what should come out, how do you summarize, how do you boil down what was let's say a 50-minute interview, sometimes an hour or more, into a 10 or 15 pages, we could have maybe 20 interviews. And I would probably publish it through Eyelet because lefty publishers don't have much distribution anywhere. And if you're not going to have distribution, at least we have the internet to let people know that they can order it through Amazon or the usual bookstores that take their 40% cut.
Yes. Okay. So we are looking for a new book designer and an editor. So crowdsourcing through our Patreon supporters here. Andrew McKean asked about US Treasury debt levels seem to keep increasing beyond all expectations, but don't seem to cause significant economic When does that stop being the case? When is the level of debt just too much? And Michael, what are you seeing with the US bond rate, how that's influencing that exact story?
Well, today there are two problems. The pretended problem that the right-wingers, the von Misesians and other people are saying is, oh, the debt's so high, the government can't afford to pay it. And somehow the government will go broke and you're not going to get the promised dollars of interest and principal that you invested. That's just silly. The advantage of having debt in your own currency is you can always pay the debt. There's no problem at all in getting repaid for your 10-year bond, 30-year bond, short-term two-year Treasury security in your own currency. The problem is if you're a foreign investor in Treasury securities, if you're a central bank and you've been receiving all of your foreign reserves, basically all of the money that America has been spending militarily over the whole world in excess of what it's earning, ends up in foreign central banks. And so Germany, Europe, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China all end up holding US Treasury bills. Well, what happens if they decide, as they've been deciding in the last month or so, they don't want to spend their savings on lending to the United States, investing in government Treasury securities to finance the budget deficit that pays for the military deficit to go to war with them and fight against them. So they're bailing out of the dollar. They're de-dollarizing. That's one of the central things that I've been saying. Well, if the dollar's gone down 10% so far under Trump and falling. So suppose you say, oh, I'm going to buy 10-year Treasury securities. They've been yielding 4.5% for the last couple of months. Well, what's the point of investing in Treasury securities, getting your 4.5% in dollars? That's okay. But if the dollar goes down by 10%, then you end up losing 5.5% on your investment. So it's not really something that is safe at all. This is the same problem with stablecoin. Stablecoin says we're investing every dollar that you put into the crypto stablecoin in Treasury securities. Well, that's fine. That means that the holder of stablecoin gets a Treasury security, but he or she doesn't get any of the interest payment on it. It's a stable coin or the other crypto company that organizes the crypto that says, okay, we've invested their money in stable coin. We're taking all of the interest for ourselves. We're making billions and billions of dollars on this. Well, one problem is they also will get the capital gain if the dollar goes up, or the capital loss if the dollar goes down. So suppose that you've invested in stablecoin, and now all the investors say, okay, we don't want to be part of an international financial system whose purpose is to finance America's military deficit and NATO's war on the 85% global majority. So please give us our money back. Well, the stable coin would then company then, all right, we'll sell all of the Treasury securities that we've invested your money safely in. But as they sell these securities, they'll be getting much less dollar money than was put in, because the interest rates will probably go up, meaning the price of these securities is going to fall as people cash in the securities and make withdrawals. And so the amount, even though it's all safety invested in Treasury and securities, the securities prices go up and down. And from 2008 to about 2022, you had the biggest bond market rally in history. You had interest rates going down from all the way to 0.1%. So this means that a huge, huge increase in the price of people who held bonds that were paying 5%, maybe even 6% on government bonds. Well, now that the interest rates are going up again, you're having the price of the bonds going down. So the problem is you can have a capital loss in your investment in Treasury securities, even though the government will pay you all of the interest and all of the principal that the bond says it's going to pay. The market price of this bond is going to fall, and you won't get as much as you would have when interest rates were lower. That's the problem.
And with yesterday's inflation figures out coming a little lower than were expected, how does inflation relate to the rising interest rate and the bond interplay?
It doesn't. That's a myth. The pretense is that, and this is a pretense that's been made since the 1750s, is that bondholders and bankers are just like everybody else. They're sort of middle-class people just trying to make a living, and they live off their bonds. And if they make money on bonds, the interest, they spend it on goods and services, so it's all somehow the money that you pay them, they spend back into the economy. Malachi Postlethwaite in 1752 had a whole argument about why England was running into trouble investing by borrowing from the Dutch. He said, well, when we borrow from the Dutch, we have to pay them debt service. And the Dutch don't buy English goods and services at all. They don't spend the money to England. In fact, they don't spend their money on goods and services at all. What do bondholders do when they get more and more interest that goes up and up and up over time? That is the interest-bearing debt goes up and up over time. Well, they use their interest receipts to make more loans and buy more bonds, or they buy luxury real estate, especially real estate in the biggest cities. The biggest cities specifically that are the big banking centers. So if, for instance, the Dutch did buy anything in England, they would buy nice, big, expensive properties in London. And in fact, the more money that England paid foreign investors, whether it was Dutch investors or others, the more international investors would buy in England, and the balance between London and other countries that were not banking centers was going to become more and more disproportionate. London would grow relative to the other centers. And the other thing that Postlethwaite said that the Dutch might spend money on, or English creditors, that bondholders that bought British bonds, they would spend money on goods and services, on luxuries, mainly Italian textiles, but not in England. I mean, England didn't really make that many luxuries. So this whole myth that somehow when interest rates go up and debt goes up, it's all recycled into the economy, and you have to keep the bondholders whole so that they don't lose money off the fact that now that there's a price inflation in goods and services, which they don't buy, they would lose out, and your heart should bleed for them and say, we've got to make sure that if the prices for our goods and services go up, that the bondholders don't lose money from this. We've got to cut back the money supply in order to keep the prices low and impose austerity. And David Ricardo came out by the time he was a bullionist in 1809 and 1810. Ricardo said that debtor countries should not have any paper money at all. Paper money just increases the ability to spend. They should have hard money, silver and gold. Coinage should be all that they had, so that they'd keep the prices low. And that would Ricardo's aim was, of course, was to prevent debtor countries from having enough government money to spend in subsidizing and developing their own industry and agriculture, so that they could do for themselves what England, France, and Germany were doing for themselves. So to answer your question, interest rates going up and down are simply an excuse for the Federal Reserve to impose austerity using junk economics.
Nice. And how much further can US debt go? The big, beautiful bill pushing debts further up towards $40 trillion. Are bondholders going to keep buying this? Or this de-dollarization, how much of a threat is this to America's future?
Well, it's a Ponzi scheme that has worked quite well so far. A Ponzi scheme will work as long as there are enough new investors in the scheme to pay interest and dividends to the already subscribed investors. But you need to keep expanding and have more and more investors come in. Well, for government debt, the government is the subscriber to the Ponzi scheme of government and private credit. And the government can continue to extend money to the banking system, to the economy, more and more debt. The economy will and the banks will borrow the interest to be paid. And as the volume of debt goes up, the volume of interest payments is going to go up that the government has to pay, as well as rolling over the debt as the maturities shorten, as the debt people will only lend for a short-term period of time. So you'll have the government basically monetizing it. And if you look at the Federal Reserve now has a negative net worth on its balance sheet because it's been just subsidizing the banks and the large financial institutions so that they are able to remain solvent in an economy that basically is insolvent. We don't have enough money to pay the debts. So what do you do if you don't have enough money to pay the debts? You print more money. I would write down the debts, but that obviously the government is not going to do that. So it's just going to wait for some crisis, and the likely crisis will be not a problem of the government stopping printing money as the federal debt rises. It'll be foreign central banks de-dollarizing, isolating the United States economy and saying, we're not interested in investing there anymore. We're not interested in agreeing to the sanctions that the United States insists that we impose on Russia, China, and other countries. We're willing to give up trade and investment with the United States to turn to parts of the world that are growing more rapidly, primarily in Asia.
Virginia Kotz asks, what would be the effect of a zero interest rate policy, a permanent ZIRP?
Well, that's what we had for quite a few years. Zero interest rates means that bank customers will borrow at zero interest, and they will buy a stock or a bond that's yielding 4.5%. For instance, if I could borrow $1 million at zero interest, I could buy a 10-year government Treasury bond that's yielding 4.5%. I could, on that million that I borrowed, I could make $45,000 a year on it. And I could just keep borrowing cheap and investing in bonds, or I could invest in stocks that may pay dividends and capital gains together of maybe 9 or 10%. And I get I get to buy more and more assets bonds and stock or real estate on credit, and hope that the asset that I buy will yield a higher return, not only interest, but capital gain, than the zero interest rate that I have to pay. So it guarantees that debtors can make a free lunch by borrowing, and also that there will be more and more financial institutions and individuals borrowing to bid up the price of assets. So you're going to have asset price inflation for all of this. Despite all of the debt, you're not going to have debt inflation, because debt deflation, because even though there's more interest that has to be paid, you still can borrow cheaper than the nominal interest and capital gain prospect that stocks, bonds, or real estate provide.
Sunil asked another good question. It appears that the UK is increasing its share of US treasuries roughly at the same rate China is reducing them. Where is Britain getting the huge amount of money to do this?
Probably from offshore banking centers. Where is Britain getting the money to buy the U.S. Treasury?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it could be acting on behalf of other governments who are doing their transactions through the Bank of England, through England. I'd have to look at the overall balance of payment statistics to answer that, but it's not really British money so much. Where is England getting the money? Its economy is in a mess right now, so it has to be foreign money going through England to the United States. And I think partly maybe it's a lot of Europeans. If you're a German, for instance, you realize that Germany's been defeated financially by the sanctions on Russia. They're called sanctions on Russia, but the American sanctions are really sanctions against Germany and Europe. It's America essentially asserting its control over Europe, fighting to the last European business until the last industry goes out of business, just like we're fighting for the last Ukrainian to pass away. So I would imagine it's European money via England.
There's plenty of interesting plays going on there in the Treasury space. Who's selling down their treasuries more, Japan or China?
China is worried that the United States is simply going to confiscate its U.S. dollar holdings, as the United States did for Russia. Since America says China is our #1 existential enemy, you really don't want to keep all your savings in the hand of someone who says you're their great enemy and they're going to, in 2 years, attack you and destroy you. So it's understandable why they might not want to hold dollars. Japan, I think, is in somewhat of a squeeze right now. And right now, especially with the tariffs, Japan just isn't obtaining the dollars from its foreign trade that it was obtaining before. And so it's having to cover its balance of payments deficit by selling its savings in the form of Treasury securities.
Okay, so gently. Matt Connors has a bit of a tongue twister here, but I know the long-term goal is to get out of this system. But in the meantime, would something like a functioning society bond in the spirit of victory bonds during World War II be a worthwhile political tool for a new party? A clumsy question, I know, but I want to end the argument that we need to keep floating bonds with none of the money raised going to real social needs. And I suppose a way to reflect on that question is the Canadian use of community bonds, where they have community bonds that are used to raise finance for community housing, for example.
Communities cannot create money. they can accumulate assets and repay debts, but only a national government can create money. So a community bond is sort of like a credit union account or a savings bank and a savings and loan association. They're not banks and they're not part of the money creation process. They're on the sidelines.
Switching gears, Jonathan Becknell asks about what assistance can Marxist political organizations in America help you, Doc Hudson, spread your economic message of an alternative GDP that you suggested in our last Patreon meetup?
I've had almost no connection with any Marxist party in my life. They're completely uninterested in financial finance. I grew up in a Marxist family. I knew many Marxists. None of them had any interest or understanding of finance. And as far as I could tell, none of them read volumes 2 or 3 of Capital. So they didn't have any idea what Marx wrote about debt and finance and rent theory. And this is not only the case in America and Europe, it was the case in China. I haven't found much receptivity in China to my talking about land rent or economic rent or value theory or the tendency of finance capital to grow exponentially to the point where there's a crisis and to essentially act in a predatory and parasitic manner. So Marxism has really very little to say about the kind of what I talk about. And the only reason that I'm considered a Marxist is I'm a classical economist. And my whole focus in all the work that I do is value and price theory, from the physiocrats through Adam Smith to John Stuart Mill. The whole of classical economics unfolding reached its pinnacle really in Marxist value theory. And it's very detailed. He said he defined he, like the other economists before him, he said the excess of market price over cost value is economic rent. How do you explain the fact that prices are in excess of the actual cost of production to the landowner or to the banker or to the monopolist or to the miner? And this is what Adam Smith, Ricardo, the physiocrats were all about. And the classical economists were essentially the theoreticians of the emergence of industrial capitalism. And they said, what do we need for Britain to become the workshop of the world, to become an industrial country? Well, what they all agreed was that you have to cut the cost of production so that you can undersell your rivals. And Marx pointed out that the ideal of industrial capitalism is to get rid of all the unnecessary costs. The unnecessary costs were economic rent, rent that, as John Stuart Mill said, landlords make in their sleep without playing any productive service at all. So the objective of all of the classical economists was to get free of economic rent. Starting with land rent, you get rid of the hereditary landlord class. How do you do it? Either you tax the land rent away or you socialize the land. You make it a public utility. Same thing with natural resources. They're the national patrimony. You don't let them be privatized. You let miners and developers, even oil companies, come in and they get a return on their capital investment to mine the ores or the minerals or the oil, but they don't get to get a value for what nature provides for nothing. This should belong to the public domain. Same thing with natural monopolies, railroads, communications, education, healthcare. All of these should, the American school of the late 19th century said that the governments should provide these services on a subsidized basis, not to make a profit. You don't want any rent extraction to exist so that you support a class that gets income without playing a productive role. Well, by the late 19th century, the landlords and the bankers and the monopolists fought back. And they said there's no such thing as economic rent, that everybody plays a role. The landlord plays a productive role. He decides, who am I going to rent to? And how much am I going to charge? And how am I going to keep repairing the building? The banker gets to create money on a keyboard, or it was on a paper and pen originally. And they decide, who am I going to lend this money to, basically. But basically, there's no cost of production for a rent yielding purpose. So the whole idea was to minimize this entire cost. Now, tell me what your question is again, and I'll get to the point about Marxism. That Marx refined the idea of all of the classical economists from Adam Smith on, Ricardo, had the labor theory of value and said, well, ultimately, how do we decide what's the cost of production as opposed to non-production costs? Well, it can all ultimately be reduced to labor. And Marx said, well, quite right, but what kind of labor are you referring to? Are you referring to the cost of labor to the industrial capitalist, or the price of this labor when the capitalist sells the products of the factory and that employs this labor at a markup, namely his profit? This is surplus value. Now, when Marx used the word surplus value, he didn't say rent. He said it's true that the industrialist sells a product for more than it costs, but he's not like a landlord or a banker or a monopolist. He actually doesn't make money in his sleep. The industrial capitalist actually plays a productive role. And so the profit and the surplus value that the capitalist makes, the industrial capitalist makes, is an element of value, and that should be included in the economy's cost, the economy's measure of product. What should not be included in the economy's product would be economic rent, the land rent, the natural resource rent, the monopoly rent, and the financial returns from the banking privilege. All rent is a return to some kind of political privilege or other, and this is not part of the production process. And Marx, more than his predecessors, was very clear in dividing the economy into two parts: the production economy that we're all familiar with, and what he called the circulation economy. He meant the financial, real estate sector, what I call it the fire sector: finance, insurance, and real estate, plus monopolies. Now, suppose you translated this value theory into national income or GDP accounts. The GDP, for being gross national product, would include what's actually produced by industry, agriculture, actual output. But the anti-classical school, which basically was a reaction against classical rent theory, said, well, there's no such thing as rent, and so there's no rentier class. And so there's no return to rentier product. So it's all part of GDP. It's all part of product. The landlord's creates a product. The banker creates a product. The miner creates a product. The monopolist creates a product. And so if you follow the classical value theory, then you'd have the GDP of the United States being maybe only order of magnitude, half as large as it actually is, because at least half of the what is counted as national income and product is the returns to the finance, insurance, and real estate sector and the various monopolies. Whereas in China, that does not have a independent financial class that makes money financially. China has essentially industrialized the financial system and creates money through the Bank of China for what it considers to be actual production, not speculation. So China has a much lower proportion of what the United Nations consider to be GDP than the lower, much higher proportion of what is considered GDP than the United States, that has all of this rentier exploitation and what Marx called unnecessary costs of production, and what Mill said, income that they make in their sleep. So that's the difference. That and you can imagine that this is exactly why the vested interests do not want to follow classical value theory. And since Marx was the last great classical economist, there were also Thorstein Veblen came later, and there were others, but it was Marx. They accuse if Adam Smith were alive today, he would be called a Marxist. If John Stuart Mill were alive today, he would be called a Marxist. Anybody would be called a Marxist who says there's such a thing as economic rent and it's unearned income, because that's what Marx said, like all the other classical economists. So the history of economic thought has been dropped from the academic curriculum so that people won't really know what Adam Smith said, what Ricardo said, what Mill said. They were supposed to be free market economists. But the whole meaning of a free market has been turned inside out. When the classical economists talked about a free market, they meant a market free from economic rent and from the rentier class. Now, the anti-classical reaction says that no, a free market is libertarian market. It's the freedom for rentiers, not to be regulated by government, not to have their rent taxed away. It's the freedom to be able to become a rentier at society's expense. That's basically the inversion of classical economics. And today, almost all classical economics is considered to be part of Marxism. And in that sense, because I'm a classical economist, I'm considered to be a Marxist.
And so neoliberalism is really eating the eyes out of classical economics, because so few people actually understand what you're talking now about, that they can get away with it. And yeah, when I hear Michael talk of the alternative GDP discussion, that's what happens after decisions are made. It's far better to think strategically and work on tax reform and get in front of those decisions so that we can target these rentier incomes and actually make a difference. It feels for me frustrating when people talk about the need for, the World Happiness Index or some other form of GDP measure. It's too late by then. The problem's already occurred. Let's get stuck into the tax reform, and that's what the classical economists were onto.
Well, about happiness, I never liked the whole idea of happiness is silly. I remember I must have been about 22 years old, and I was invited to a party, and they passing drinks around, and the hostess came over to me and said, "Are you happy?" And I thought, well, gee, it's a philosophical question. What is happiness? And she said, no, do you want a refill on your whiskey? I mean, that's my idea of, as far as I can understand happiness. I'm not a philosopher.
Yep. Okay, well, why don't we open it up? Carl Sanchez, you got a question there. Do you just want to ask it? Come on screen. Undo your microphone. There we go.
There you are.
I gotta figure out what I wrote here now.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. What did Marx specifically write that pissed off the capitalists and the rentiers? Why did they wage war on Marx?
Wait, why did they what for Marx?
Why did they wage war on Marx / Marxism?
Because Marx they were waging war not against Marx himself, but against the whole of classical economics. They were waging war against Adam Smith, against John Stuart Mill, against Ricardo. They were waging war on the concept that some people did not earn the money and the wealth that they had, that some was unearned. It was an unnecessary cost of production. The money that you paid them wasn't for them playing a productive role. And the parasite said, we are not parasites. We are part of the host itself. And that's the point that I made in Killing the Host, that they wanted to be considered productive. That's what they didn't like about Marxism. Quite apart from the fact that before Marx, the value theorists who developed the theory of value and price, that price is the excess of rent over cost value, that these were basically bourgeois. They were capitalists. They were not trying to develop how do we make industrial capitalism more efficient. They made it more efficient by minimizing the amount of wages that they had to pay their labor force. And to Ricardo and the other classical economists, you minimize what you have to pay your labor by making their food cheaper, by making their basic needs cheaper, so that you didn't have to pay them enough money to pay agricultural landlords for high-priced food, housing landlords for high-priced housing. You didn't have to pay any of that. But what Marx said was, let's look at this from the point of view of the workers. The workers, what do they really need the capitalists to be the major investors? You're already having government investment in public infrastructure, government investment in America, the Erie Canal, also the railroad. Private investment is not as cost efficient as public investment. So to them, the fact that the whole tendency of classical economics was to evolve into socialism, and the opponents of socialism, mainly the rentier class, the rent extracting class, didn't want to see governments get strong enough so that they could tax the land. They said, we don't want a strong government. If we can keep governments weak, they won't be able to tax the land, and we can defeat them. They won't be able to regulate banking and keep us honest. They won't be able to regulate rents and keep the price of housing from being extortionate on housing people. They won't be able to have antitrust legislation to prevent monopolies from exploiting people. So essentially you had these were opponents of governments strong enough to actually implement classical political economy.
Okay, so you have the rentiers, we'll go ahead and call them that, and then so they'd said that now the main argument that I recall against communism was that they'll take your property from you. That's what was said to America back in the Red Scare after World War I. The communists will take your property from you. You'll lose all your property to them. They'll confiscate everything you own. Now, I don't think there's a shred of truth to that, because as I understand it, you can go ahead and keep your property. It's just a matter of now it's going to get taxed. You're not going to be able to go ahead and keep the excess that you earn from that property. So
That's right. Yeah. The Marxists and the capitalists, the Marxists and the classical economists said you don't have to take their property. Yeah, you just have to collect the economic rent that the property has. Same thing, and look at Russia today. You don't have to actually take back the property that the kleptocrats have registered in their own name. From the oil industry, all of the other assets that they stole in the 1990s. All you have to do is collect the rents from these properties.
right.
You can leave them with the property. The key is the income from this property.
Mm-hmm. So the big lie back in the Red Scare, post World War I, was that the communists will take your property, and that was the big lie that was said, and it was never. Was it ever really backed up by any particular, empirical evidence? I don't recall ever reading anything in my history, quests that showed any of that. It was just, that's what the narrative was.
Well, then, while that was going on, think of Lenin had the new economic policy, the NEP, and he certainly left the property in the hands of the bourgeois, but he didn't permit them to make an income that was exploitative. Because, and of course, this occurred much more in China under Deng. Deng said, a white cat, black cat, what difference does it make as long as it catches mice? He let 100 flowers bloom. He let individual enterprises develop, and they could get rich. And if you got super rich, like Jack Ma, then and other billionaires, you'd say, okay, you can't get that rich. We are going to have some kind of a progressive wealth tax. And even if we don't legislate a wealth tax or a rent tax, we're not going to permit billionaires from getting much more than we think is morally right. But we'll leave you with the property. You just can't become a billionaire from it.
Right. Okay. Well, that covers the question that I had pretty much about wanting to put a tail on a donkey with regards to the whole narrative scheme that communism is evil and all that. Yep. So essentially, it was a big lie from the get-go, and all too many people swallowed it.
Remember, they were saying that government is evil. Adam Smith is evil. The classic John Stuart Mill is evil. It the whole the evil went way. What they called communism was everything that was considered industrial capitalism in a century earlier.
All right. So, in your investigations, did you uncover anything that was specifically publicly stated like that? Did you ever find out anything that was specifically publicly stated in that manner? Papers written or speeches given?
No, Marx did not write volume 3.
Any of the reactionaries, did they, and what they said?
Yeah, well, what you do have is their alternative explanation of price. You had the English saying, well, there's no such thing as rent, creating an excess of price over value. The consumer is king, and it's consumer utility is what explains the high price. Has nothing to do with cost of production, nothing to do with economic rent. It's just if consumers want something, it's going to be a high price. relative to the cost of production, and they didn't distinguish the cost of production between necessary and unnecessary costs, between profits and rent. You had the Austrian school also that tried to imagine that there could be an idealistic economy without government at all, when essentially the capitalist sector could do whatever it want, like it did in Vienna, murdering the communists. What Marx did see, the communists were accused of threat of violence. What Marx did say is that the rentier class is going to fight with violence to prevent economic reform. Look at the Paris Commune in 1871, I think, around that time of the Prussian-French War.
Right.
Marx saw that it was the classes that did not have to work for their income and actually create their own product that were fighting to keep their privilege, that somehow the classes that actually did work, the capitalists, industrialists, and labor did not fight with the violence that the rentiers fought back. The Austrian school, the right-wingers in the United States, the followers of anti-rent theory of John Bates Clark, and the anti-classical reaction that I described in Killing the Host.
Okay.
Okay. Interesting. Michael, information flows are one of the big criticisms under the communist system. They don't rely on the pricing mechanism to allocate resources. Have you seen any improvements in sort of socialist Marxist thinking on how those information flows can be improved to better reflect genuine price?
That gets into computers and things, and I'm a techno peasant, so not my department.
Okay, let's move on to Steve Reed, who asked a good question, and good to hear from you, Steve. I'd love to know the historical countries or places where money creation was done by the ruler for the good of the people and not private debt based.
Well, all money is debt, and some kinds of debt are accepted as money. So you really talk, if you're talking about money creation, you have to talk about credit and debt creation. And that goes way beyond money itself. And if you talk about money without credit and debt, then it's as if you're talking about commodity money instead of money as a legal institution, as Aristotle pointed out. And as I describe in my history of the Bronze Age and temples of enterprise and creating economic order, and the other books that I've talked about in antiquity.
And what
And
about
the book that I will be publishing, that Carl mentioned at the very beginning, on the history of the the banking sector's political alignment from the Crusades to World War I, is all about the transformation of money away from commodity money to government debt serving as money, starting with the Bank of England.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see that book come to life, Michael. Really looking forward to that one. Kimberly Mims from our excellent transcription team has a bit of a long question, but let's get into this. A new generation of Americans is talking about feeling, character, role, story at work and at play. Hollywood film, theater, and performance art are coming together. The other day, Norman Finkelstein compared Rosa Luxemburg and her cohort unfavorably to today's left. The point: someone has scored a generational win against Labour as a classical European Enlightenment project. Can it be reversed or moved productively forward?
Could you paraphrase that?
I'd love to. I think she's talking about identity politics, working against Labor and how they can be,
Yes.
how can the left move forward from that?
There we go. You've explained it all. The Democratic Party is the most anti-labor party. It's the hardline Wall Street party, and its idea is, how do we get voters to stop talking about economic issues? And so their solution is identity politics. First of all, during the 60s and 70s, there was ethnic politics. The Democratic Party was divided into sort of organizations of Greek American, Italian Americans, Irish Americans. They worked through various ethnicities to get that. Then it gradually became increasingly racial equality politics. And then finally, the great breakthrough was under Clinton and the really hardline anti-labor strategists who said, let's bring in the LGBTQ. And so you can have every kind of identity, Irish, Italian, Black, white, LGBTQ, every identity except being a wage earner. And if you can just keep distracting people so that it's every identity except the one common denominator of being a wage earner, then they're not going to see what an enemy of all of them the Democratic Party is. And its support of Wall Street, its support of war, its support of the military-industrial complex, its support of the landlord and financial class. That it wants to make itself invisible by having people talk about something other than its identity and their identity, which are opposite.
Dina Lebowitz has another long question. Let's see how we go with this one. We've read that one explanation of the whole US deportation of tens of thousands of refugees and immigrants is part of a program planning to remove people currently working low-paid jobs and to replace them with children, as well as to replace them with almost rightless H-2A visa workers. The point of this, according to various sources, is to create a large, extremely vulnerable subclass of workers unlikely to fight back, to disempower workers altogether. Also, Bucale is apparently in bed with the gangs and wants as many gang members shipped to him ASAP because their prosecution through the US courts will expose this. Any thoughts on this? Please speak on how different sectors within the elites are fighting. How is this likely to play out?
If you could translate that question into something more specific, I could do.
It's basically what I'm saying.
Member, I don't know what the connection is.
I'm seeing from Australia that we're seeing a fake battle between Labor and capital being set up so that rentiers can continue carrying on as usual, and the immigrant deportation thing's a giant distraction. And Michael, please tell me what's happening with special economic zones. I want to hear the analysis of what Trump's doing through the big, beautiful bill. What tax carve-outs is he putting in there for the rentiers? Those special economic zones.
To me, it looks like just old-fashioned American racism. White people hate people who aren't white. They hate the Indians. They hate the blacks. They hate the Native Americans. They hate each other's ethnicities. That's what Western civilization, that's what Christianity is all about. The Western religions are hate religions, and the population is brought up to hate. That's what made Roman Christianity different from every other religion. And I go into this in my book on the Crusades. I explain why it was that the Roman Church, the papacy, became so authoritarian in order to reform an utterly corrupt Roman papacy. They started, the first crusade was supposed to be to liberate Jerusalem. But Jerusalem didn't need liberation. There was already a Christian church there. There was a Jewish church there. There was Islamic churches there because the Muslims were in charge. The Muslims were tolerant of all the different religions, all the way from the Middle East to Spain and Sicily, that was very largely Muslim. You had, it was only, and you had already in the 5th and 6th centuries BC, when Charlemagne, around the 8th century, I shouldn't say BC, the 8th century of our era, when Charlemagne decided to declare, and his forebears declared war on the Saxons in northern Germany, and tried to kill them because their religion was based around sacred trees. There was this intolerance that was characteristic of Western civilization that had not characterized other civilizations all the way back through antiquity. Yeah, you remember Persia, that when Persia conquered Babylonia, they left the Babylonians to follow their own religion. You can do whatever you want as long as you pay taxes and tribute. Same thing, they were all tolerant of the Jews. There was no anti-Semitism. It was the Catholic Church that really introduced anti-Semitism, just as it introduced the anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic spirit. There can only be one God and one church, and that's us. It was all a kind of power play, and that feeling of religion, that if you're not part of our group, you're not going to heaven, you're the devil. This either or polarization thinking, politically and ethnically and racially and religiously, every other way, is a distinct feature of Western civilization in the modern era. It just didn't occur before. So, and in America, it's really worst of all because of America's history of slavery in the South. But what was began simply as race hatred and a hatred of Indians, Native Americans, just as much, became a hatred of the new immigrant influx, the Central Europeans, Central European Jews, the Italian immigrants, the Irish immigrants, especially the Irish. They were all really prejudiced against. All this is distinctly American. And I don't think you can say there's, I think that Trump simply wants to get elected, and he's appealing to this rotten American identity politics and racism, quite different from the Democratic Party's identity politics, in just a demagogic manner.
But Michael, when it comes to racism, don't you think that the original sin was Indigenous people around the world inherently understanding the value of the earth? And that was something that must be despised and deterred at all fronts. And so that's where the genocide originally began, and the hatred.
Yeah, that was the cover story. I mean, all they really wanted was gold. They really wanted just to get rid of the domestic population, and all they wanted was the metal, the silver. And the gold. But again, there was a hatred of the other. There was a hatred for people who were not yet Christianized. And even if you'd be Christianized, if the Jews would convert to Christianity, the Maronians, they were held again with some degree of hatred. I mean, that all of that was a byproduct of this of the Catholic Inquisition, of which the Americans are still singing popular songs about that. Do you remember? Do any of you remember the movie The Singing Nun with Debbie Reynolds? There was that tune, Dominique, Niki, Niki, da 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 da. It's about the Dominicans killing and torturing the Cathars of France for saying that their Christianity thought that yes, there is a heaven and hell, and the hell is here on earth, and it's run by the church. So they all had to be killed. And that was the Inquisition. I mean, to think that that can be a popular song by the church, and they make funny movies about happily singing about the Dominicans is quite something. In that, I mean, I think that there were later comedies about Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor of Spain, by comedians. But that was meant to be black comedy, not really serious ditties.
What about the role of art in previous times, helping the everyday person to understand the role of the rentiers? You mentioned Mark Twain earlier. There was a long tradition of artists who understood the power of monopoly and helped to break that down through poetry, music, theatre, and the like. Where do you take your leads from on that side?
There was a big anti-monopoly movement. It was all untracked, unfortunately, by one of the someone who hated classical economics, Henry George, who essentially said there's no such thing as economic rent, which is ironic.
Come on, he did not say that.
No, yes, he did. He wrote this awful book, Progress and Poverty, when he said that I agree with the attack on classical value theory that says rent is the excess of price over cost value. That's not it at all. Rent is the price is what the British say it is. It's all consumer utility. The consumer is really king. He expelled anyone who talked about classical economics, anyone who talked about Marxism. He expelled from his group. He didn't want nowhere in any of his writing do you have any discussion of classical value and price theory. He said, I'm the person who sort of invented the fight against rent. He was a narcissist, and he really took the side of the opponents of economic rent by saying the central point of he was a libertarian and said you must not have a government strong enough to tax landlords because a strong government is the enemy. I'm a libertarian. You need a small government. So he crippled the whole idea of fighting against economic rent by being a socialist. He declared war on socialists. He was a right-winger and spent his life fighting against socialism, expelling the socialists. All of this happened really when he ran. He wrote a wonderful book on the Irish land question that made a reputation. Then he wrote Progress and Poverty that was a very popular journalism book. But he was a journalist, not an economist. And so the socialists and the labor groups of New York City said, well, we really want to have a chance to take over New York City. And they nominated Henry George to be mayor. And George said, only if I can write the program. The political program. And they said, well, they had read Progress and Poverty. They were under the illusion that he wanted to essentially get rid of economic rent and the power of landlord. Well, the first thing George did was get rid of all of the rent controls. He said, all you have to do is tax rent and you won't need rent controls anymore. He got rid of every socialist every element of the platform except tax the land without any of looking at the economy as an economic system. And he very quickly dragged his followers to fall off the right wing of the political spectrum. And so the combination of saying a small government, we don't need big governments because that's socialist. We don't need the value theory of Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and Marx. That's socialist. He was all by himself and ended up completely being isolated. And when there was a revival of Henry George followers in the United States in the 1920s, they were all right-wing libertarian anti-socialists, exactly the kind of people that you and Carl described earlier, the right wing anti-socialists. So that was sort of that sort of helped untrack the fight against land rent in the United States. And you had during the 1990s Marxists and followers of George going around the country debating each other. And these were published by Marxist publisher in Chicago, Charles Kerr and Company. And the debates were really wonderful. They spelled out the difference between socialism and the classical economists on the one hand, and the George's followers on the other. And all of this was spelled out. And they kept saying, well, why don't you followers of Henry George become socialists and support a government strong enough so that we can not only we can first of all impose rent control, take away rents, then we can begin to tax the landlords, tax all of this. George would have no part of it. So that the socialists said, okay, you go your way, we'll go our way. We're going to talk about labor issues and social democratic reforms. What labor needs, what government reforms for the poor need. You can go on with your you can handle the economic rent bit. We're all in favor of taxing land, but we can't work. You don't want to work with us, so goodbye.
So, Michael, I don't know how you got from arts to you're beating up on Henry George, one of my heroes. But yeah, it's perfectly acceptable for there to be a diversity of tactics. We know that there is a strong libertarian movement in America at present. So why not speak to them about the economic efficiencies that taxing land and monopoly can create and reducing the deadweight costs?
There's no point in talking to a crazy person. You
could say that about plenty of socialists as well. How do you find the radical center and be able to speak to both left and right at once? And that is the beauty of being able to talk about the lowest deadweight costs when you do tax land and monopoly. So that's how I speak to government here in Australia, and that's how I've changed 3 taxes. Henry George did come up with a really powerful economic formula. Production minus rent equals wages plus interest. And
that's it. I forgot to say, George was a big promoter of the banks. He was a defender of the rentier class. He was the defender of the financial class. Of course, that's what I should have said right away. If you look at his awful chapter in
Progress and Poverty,
he called profits interest. He was all in favor of. He wanted industry to be financialized. He was basically the apostle of financial doom. That's exactly it. Imagine interest.
He was certainly that chapter was not his best effort, and it would have been much more advisable if he'd taken Flersheim's much wiser approach to interest. But switching back
you said something. I want to interrupt. The reason that you have and other Australians have an appreciation of George is because of Michael Flersheim, who came to Australia and had originally been an associate of George because he saw the need to tax the land as part of the overall reform of the rentier class, but he also saw the role of finance very clearly and was a wonderful popularizer. His Clue to the Economic Labyrinth, I think, was published in Perth. Initially, at least the copy that I bought, it was published in the 1890s. And it was Florsheim that sort of brought this these ideas, sponsored these ideas in Florida and Australia. Florsheim had tried to bring to popularize George and brought him to there was a big land tenure conference in France, in Paris. And he brought Henry George to Paris, and George got very embarrassed. He was sort of unable to be the center of attention because other people were talking about Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and socialism, and so Florsheim said George just stayed in his hotel room all along and all alone, and went with his wife throughout the Paris, and just he was too ashamed to show himself in public for being so economically illiterate and unable to be part of the discussion with people who actually talked about economics, not just journalistic sloganeering.
Andrew McKean says, I thought if you tax the economic rent properly, you don't need a big government. And Michael, I would love to hear you talk more.
Carl, the entire thrust of the 19th century classical economists were to tax the land. They failed. They thought that this was what classical economics was all about. Of course, they wanted to tax all forms of economic rent, monopoly rent and finance, but it was all trying to free industrial capitalism from the landlord class. It failed.
We understand that. So let's talk strategically. Imagine you're 84. We got to get this wisdom out of you. If we are to have a strong government so that they can take on monopoly, and we also have a pricing system that's reflective of production plus a small return to capital, reasonable return, where is the role for big government? Do we have an army of lawyers like Matt Stoller has sitting in every court case, government versus big monopoly? Where is the resourcing of government dedicated towards to keep monopoly in check?
I see the problem. How do you get from here to there? Of course, what you describe is just exactly what would be ideal. Of course, we'd like what you describe. Of course, it would be how you want to end up. The problem is that, as I said, and as we were talking about with Carl Sanchez, the rentiers fight back violently, and it looks like the only countries that have been able to prevent a rentier class from taking over, either the landlords or, in the modern world, the bankers, have been through revolutionary form. First the Russian Revolution, and then the Chinese Revolution. You needed a revolution, and the Chinese Revolution got rid of the landlords and got rid of the financial bankers. And so the government, of course, had land as a public utility, and of course had money and credit creation and banking as a public utility. So, but you needed to get from here to there. And it looks like because of the willingness and ability of the rentiers, being the vested interests, after all, to use their power as vested interests to control the army, as Trump is controlling the National Guard, as we discussed. I think Marx said the end of capitalism will not be a pretty sight. Well, that's the problem. How do you get from here to there? Now, that was the problem with what Henry George said. How to get from here to there? He would have had to work with the socialist movement to essentially overpower the landlord class.
But let's get to the point now.
The whole 19th century failed.
Let's get to the argument now. We've identified that people don't I would prefer in a way to focus on identity politics rather than understand the pricing structure and rentier behavior. The people at the forefront of this pressure of high land price, high banking costs, high taxation are small business. So I said at the last gathering that if we're going to get anywhere, we have to find a way to split the right wing to reveal what in Australia are called the classical liberals. Probably the wrong terminology in America, but these are people who respect the market system but know something is wrong and recognize that if we pull the power of big business backwards, we get a fairer society where we can walk the streets without worrying about being robbed.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, Carl. And now I realize what the problem is. If you just say the enemy is the landlord, then you don't realize, well, who's protecting the landlord? The protector of the landlord is the financial class, because in today's society, you no longer have a hereditary landed aristocracy that lives off its hereditary ground rent, is the legacy of what their forebears had conquered. Anybody can obtain housing or buy a commercial office building. But in order to afford a home or an office building, you have to take out a mortgage. And the result is that the land rent is used to pay interest. Rent is for paying interest. And the leadership of the fight against critics of rentiers are the banks. The banks are protecting the landlord class because 80% of bank loans in the US, England, and other countries are mortgage loans. And of course, the banks are going to protect their number one customer, the real estate sector, just as they protect their other customers in the monopoly business. So it's the banks that have become the central planner and the controller of fiscal policy. That's also a theme of my book on the politics of international banking from the Crusades to World War I. So you have to realize that, yes, landlords collecting rent are bad, but let's go after their big protectors, the banks. You have to attack the banks. And if you celebrate interest and saying, I'm all for interest is like George did, then they're poof. You've crippled your vocabulary. You've crippled your way of thinking about how to create a political movement to explain, what I've been trying to do for the last, really for all my life, to explain how it's the financial sector that is the protector of the rest of the rentier sectors altogether, because rents are for paying interest.
Yeah, well, how does it play out today with the Koch brothers, the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025? Are there really bankers behind that? Or is it other, the conglomeration of rent seekers that have driven this agenda that's now created this immigration paranoia, distracting from what AI has just told me the big, beautiful bill is expanding in terms of tax deductions?
Well, the Koch brothers made their money in rent seeking. Especially their big fortune, I think I'm told, was stealing oil from the Native American Indian reservations. And they were about to be prosecuted when under the Clinton administration, when you had the Clinton affair with the dress and all coming out. And the deal was, okay, we're not going to impeach. The Republicans agreed not to impeach Clinton if Clinton agreed to not to prosecute the Koch brothers for the steal. So the Koch brothers realized that you can't really come out and say, I'm going to have a political party that is all in favor of economic rent, because you don't even want people to think in terms of economic rent. You try to get a populist cause by appealing to the lowest common denominator. And as you just pointed out, the lowest common denominator is anti-immigrant racism. And that the Koch brothers and these other right-wing institutions are part of the whole matrix of fighting against thinking about how to create a government and a society without a rentier class.
So the big beautiful bill has enhanced tax breaks for real estate investors, including 100% bonus depreciation restored, the Section 199A deductions extended for real estate investment trusts, and estate and gift tax exemptions increased from 15 million per individual or 30 million per couple, indexed to inflation. Alongside of that, the SALT deduction cap has been raised to $40,000 to give relief to property owners in high tax states. Additionally, the special economic opportunity zones have been expanded with a limit of 25% of eligible low-income tracts per state. My understanding, the special economic zone is if you leave, invest in a community, you get a 50% capital gains tax deduction if you leave it there for a decade. So, yeah, these are the things, Michael. I would love to hear Americans writing about.
I'm glad you brought up Karl Marx again. This is very important. It was Marx who created the theory of depreciation as an element of value. Prior to Marx, the classical economists only considered income as a component of value, the return to capital. And Marx said the value of an industrial product is not only the return to capital, it's the actual original capital investment itself. And he introduced the concept of depreciation into value theory, or what now is called EBITA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Well, what has happened is that the real estate sector, and I've written quite a bit about this, and I think you were alluding to that in your lead-in, they pretend that real estate depreciates, and they pretend that buildings depreciate, and all of the American statistics follow this false, misleading economics that pretend that the increase in the value, in the market price, I should say, the market price of real estate is the increase in the construction cost of a building. Every time a real estate property is sold, the new owner of the property gets, if it's a rental property, homeowners are not allowed to charge depreciation, but commercial investors are, and they're allowed to start depreciating the building at a higher and higher and higher level. What you and I know is really land rent is somehow included into the price of the building. That whole twist to give free money to the landlords was developed by the head of the Schockenbach Foundation and the Henry George School, Lowell Harris, that supported supported all that. It was a Georgists who thought of, well, in order to have a land tax, we got to get mayors on our side. Who finances mayors' campaigns? The real estate interests. So if we can back the real estate interests, we can get the mayors to support Henry George. And here, if we give them a whole giveaway with free depreciation, look at what we've done. They'll support Henry George as long as he supports the landlords. They'll support him back. This was the craziness that I encountered. And when you say 100% depreciation, imagine if you buy a building, you begin depreciating the whole building at right away at not at 20 years or 7. The depreciation tax write-off that you do not have to pay income tax on because it's not considered income. It makes real estate tax-free. It makes any kind of a monopoly tax-free if you can somehow depreciate the monopoly privilege. And so the concept of depreciation has been turned into a way of making rent-yielding properties tax exempt. That is the twist. I know that's very technical. I've written about it. I think I have all my charts on that in The Bubble and Beyond, and I've described it more briefly in Killing the Host, and the other articles that I've published. Depreciation, the articles that I've written with Dirk Besmer have all the statistics on this depreciation ripoff.
And that's why Trump calls depreciation a beautiful thing. He's
Yes,
always
that's why he doesn't have to pay income tax.
Yeah. And
Yeah, if
part
you're
of
a landlord, because of depreciation, you don't have to pay tax on land rent. That's the irony. That look at how economic orthodoxy has been inverted from the time of the 18th century physiocrats and Adam Smith to the 19th century classical economists who wanted to tax the land, and now the orthodoxy makes land rent tax exempt. That's how the inversion of economics, and it's only by studying this inversion and by studying value and price theory and analyzing its components of beta and the twists and turns it's taken that you can somehow educate a political movement to understand the ripoff that's been pulled. Most people don't understand that rent seeking is a ripoff. And even Milton Friedman and even though Margaret Thatcher's advisors recognized, yes, there is such a thing as economic rent, they never really followed it up and said that is today the most important economic concept, just as it was in classical value theory.
Yep, I think that'll be the title of this episode. Rent seeking is a ripoff. Nicely said. Yeah, but behind that whole depreciation play is really the drive to down value the value of land, of the earth. And so property valuers have been encouraged to overestimate the building valuation and underestimate the land. And that's maxed the depreciation write-offs, but it's also helped delegitimize an understanding of how location as the number one real estate strategy was also the number one taxation base for government back when Adam Smith was writing about it. That was the understood trajectory. We were heading that way to remove these feudal overlords from our lives once and for all. And we could do it in a way that was more efficient than what tariffs and the like could deliver. So yeah, what's your latest take on tariffs? Where are we sitting on Taco Trump, and can we just call him Dickie Don now, Dictator Don? Yeah.
I should say that one of the tragedies of the socialist revolution is that it is not applied the land tax. The Soviet Union got rid of landlords, and so they got rid of really the concept of economic rent. And they didn't take into account the rent of location and how important that was. And that was certainly the Westerners who bought real estate in Russia found that. And China has not taken in the rent of location as a means of preventing the increased rent of location in the form of land price that became the real estate bubble. I've not been able to bring, I've had the most difficulty of introducing the concept of economic rent to socialists. Marxists don't accept it, and governments that consider themselves to be Marxist have a resistance to thinking of the concept of economic rent. That's how far they've moved away from volumes 2 and 3 of Capital and the classical economic tradition on which Marx was based.
Matt Connors says 2 hours of Hudson equals 3 hours of future reading to keep up. Good point,
Well,
Matt.
it helped that I got very annoyed that I had to wait a half hour to get on, and my annoyance gave me enough energy to go through all of this. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, and that's
Yes.
300 hours, not 3 hours, and that's an understatement for sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, get into it, Matt. There's so much interesting reading out there that Michael brings to light. Yeah, Carl Sanchez says the big, beautiful bill. The big whopper in that is the oil depletion allowance. Michael, do you know what about that one?
The oil depletion allowance, again, it was all based on replacement costs. The oil companies were able to charge it's like not depreciation but amortization. Once you deplete an oil well, now remember, you're in the oil company's investment in the oil industry is to make derricks to pump the oil and refineries, but they don't have to pay for the creation of the oil in the ground. That's created by nature. So they come in, they dig an oil well, they empty it out, and then they say, well, we need to we've used up, we've depreciated what we bought, and this depreciation was supposed to be only for industrial investment like refineries and oil rigs. Now we need to replace this oil. And because of inflation, because of the increasing scarcity of oil in some places, we get to say, here is what we get to take as a tax deduction to buy the same amount of field yielding the same amount of oil at double the price. And this amortization, we get to charge off against our income because we're using it all up for the replacement cost. And the oil industry was tax exempt ever since the 1920s. As soon as America passed the income tax law in 1913, the cost accountants got together in the 1920s and began finding all of these loopholes to make sure that the rent extracting sectors didn't have to pay an income tax. And when I went to work for Continental Oil, one of the first things they wanted me to do was say, what's the justification for the depletion allowance? And I was drawing a parallel between that and industrial industrial depletion and depreciation. They didn't want to hear that at all. They just wanted to understand that I knew what depletion was for all of that. This is arcane. This is a topic. The depreciation, rent. These are not taught in academic economics courses. So you can go all the way through a PhD, as I did at NYU, without there being any mention of things like depreciation, depletion, beta, all of the or the balance of payments, or any of the nitty gritty of how society is actually put together and works in a gimmicked way, using all sorts of rhetorical pretense to pretend that the economy works in a different way than it really does.
Yeah, we have one of our most prestigious universities here has a brand new lecture theatre called the Center for Market Design.
Oh,
it's all about how to set up
I'm going to have
barriers.
to eat pretty soon. I've been talking for almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
okay, well, let's finish off with China. You've talked about them favorably a few times. They've also had the potential to introduce a land or property tax, I think it was about 3 years ago, in their 5-year plan, and they shied away from it. And for me, that was demonstrative of just how powerful landed interests are, even in China. What are you hearing?
What you call the land interest is the financial interest. If they begin taxing the land and imposing a land tax on top of the mortgage interest that buyers already pay, there'd be huge defaults on property. In order to have a land tax, you have to get rid of the financial debt attached to the land and attached to real estate. And as long as you leave the financial claims for debt payment collateralized by the land as the basis of your financial system, introducing a land tax would cause a bank crisis. That's the problem. It's the same problem in the United States. That's the problem in every country. That's why if you do support a land tax, you have to confront the fact that right now, the land rent is already committed to be paying interest to the banks, and that the banks would become insolvent if the owners of property had to pay for the land rent and pay for the mortgage interest that is a capitalization of this land rent.
And also that growth in land price is the basis for money supply growth as well.
Yes.
So that is where they work hand in hand. And that's why, Michael, we need to work on some policy documents on how we can actually tease out this knowledge of yours and work that into a framework that
I would need a whole team, a statistical team, that I could walk them through the statistics. You really need a think tank of economists who are trained in this, such as does not exist at the present time.
Yes. Well, Mr. Sanchez says land as a public utility would eliminate the need for a land tax. Do you think that's true, Michael?
If it's a public utility owned by the government and the government collected the tax on it, the Chinese government technically owns all the land, I guess, like the Queen of England, now the King of England, is supposed to own the British land. Not ownership, but it has to be the tax base. And if the tax base is already fully committed to pay the banks, you need to restructure the financial system. You need a debt write-down. Without writing off the debt, without a debt write-down, you cannot have room to introduce a land tax.
Well, just to let you know, here in my state, there have been 3 land-related charges, and there has not been a crash, but there has been a disparity, a growing widening between the price of land in Sydney and the price of land in Melbourne. It traditionally is about $200,000 difference, and now it's at $412,000 difference in 18 months of these new policies that I helped implement. So it can happen, but yeah, on a macro scale, it's fascinating to have these discussions as always, Michael. So yeah, thanks once again for forging ahead, and yeah, we really look forward to the new book on the debt crusades. And is there any little teaser you can leave us with there that may shine a different light on how we're perceiving some of the tensions around the world?
No, I want to focus on what we've said. This is really important. A price, value, and rent is what an analysis is all about. That's the focus of everything that I do. So I'm looking forward to the transcript of this. Yes,
we've got to get this one up. The last one hasn't gone up yet, and these sessions are deep. We get to dive into areas of your amazing mind that we don't often hear from. So thanks everyone for joining us here. Thanks Patreon supporters for being patient. Great to see you all, and hopefully we can get more of you up on screen next time. Thank you, Michael.
Good discussion.
Thank you, Michael.